And the crazy part about it is, like, everybody who's calling him a culture vulture has all reason to call him a culture vulture, because at the end of the day, he has not done anything for the culture.
Drake, is he really the biggest culture vulture in hip-hop, or has he actually built the culture more than anyone else? Today, we're breaking down the truth behind the accusations, and trust me, by the end of this video, your whole perspective on Drake might change. It's not surprising that people are quick to label him a culture vulture. Honestly, the criticism sticks because, when you look at it closely, he hasn't contributed much of anything meaningful back to the very culture he borrows from. Fast forward to September 2, 2025. Bobby Aoff made her return to podcasting with a brand new show titled Not This Again. The project feels like a pivot from her earlier series, The Really Good Podcast, carving out a different lane entirely. And the first big surprise guest, Drake. Now, their history together isn't exactly a secret. They've collaborated before, but that's a story for another time. What mattered in this conversation was the tone. For once, Drake let his guard down. There was a moment where he carried genuine regret, something he admitted weighed heavily on him.
Culture vulture, or like like people will describe the collaborative efforts that I've put forth and the artists that I've picked up and lifted up, or shine a light on as me taking, they'll put a negative spin on it and try and tell me, that it's a self-serving thing or whatever. And I think I get really sensitive about that. And I think at that moment I was just like, well, you know what? Then don't even.
In this moment, Drake pushed back against the criticism. Being branded a culture vulture clearly bothers him, and he made it known that he sees himself on the opposite side of that label. From his perspective, he's invested heavily in the culture, collaborating with countless artists, helping shine a light on new talent, and giving opportunities that might not have existed without his platform. So, to him, the accusations simply don't add up. But not everyone buys into Drake's defense. There are voices in the industry who argue that his involvement hasn't always been as selfless or as beneficial as he claims, keeping the debate around his place in the culture alive and unresolved.
We call you a culture vulture. It isn't, because you tried something new. It's because you changed who you were to match all of the different vibes that Drake wanted to be.
The deeper point here is that the criticism aimed at Drake isn't rooted in personal dislike. It's about the artistic choices he's made over time. The argument goes, you're being called a culture vulture, not because people want to tear you down, but because somewhere along the way, you shifted who you were as an artist. Take Bone Thugs-n-Harmony as a contrast. Their sound was unmistakable. No one rapped or harmonized the way they did. Whenever they appeared on a track, whether it was a hit or a miss, you still knew instantly, that's Bone Thugs. Their identity stayed intact, even when collaborating with others. That kind of consistency is exactly what critics feel Drake has strayed from. And so, the young man making this case circles back to the same refrain. For all Drake has accomplished, the question still lingers: has he stayed true to himself, or has he morphed into something unrecognizable along the way?
For all that he is, like, every album for a while, he was trying a new thing. He wasn't stealing from different cultures. He was expanding his palette, but it always sounded like him. You know what I mean? Like, and even if we're gonna go to just trying new things, right? Like, every time Cardi B is on a record with somebody else, like when she was doing stuff with Megan sounds like Megan on every record. Cardi sounds like Cardi on.
In breaking down his case, the critique often points to Drake's shifting artistic identity. When people look at artists like Kanye West, Cardi B, or Megan Thee Stallion, they see individuals who, despite experimenting and evolving, still brought something distinct and original to the table. Sexy Red falls into that same category. Love it or hate it, her sound is undeniably hers. Drake, however, is accused of something different, reshaping his creative DNA to mirror whatever wave is already rising. The UK grime and drill scene is a prime example. Having lived in Europe, I saw firsthand how grime was building momentum, spreading from the UK to places like Poland, and carving out a strong presence in Africa. At one point, British rappers were criticized for sounding too much like Americans. Eventually, they doubled down on their own style and made it global. When Drake collaborated with artists like Skepta and Giggs, the concern wasn't just that he was working with them, but that afterwards he began adopting their slang, their beats, and their aesthetic. Even UK insiders accused him of riding the wave only once it became internationally appealing. The same story plays out with Caribbean dancehall and Afrobeat. Tracks like One Dance Controlla and Come Closer with Wizkid leaned heavily on those genres. But again, critics asked, where was Drake when these movements were still in their grassroots stages? To them, he only showed up once the sound was too big to ignore. This pattern stretches back to his early years too, when he leaned into Houston's chopped and screwed sound and Memphis rap. Yes, his father's roots trace back to Memphis, but Drake himself is from Toronto, raised by a Jewish mother. To some, his geographic and cultural distance makes those influences feel borrowed rather than lived. And in this way, Drake is often compared to Diddy. Both have survived in music not just by raw talent, but by adapting to whatever is hot at the moment. They co-sign new artists, amplify rising sounds, and in doing so, keep themselves relevant. The catch. Detractors argue they only ever attach themselves once something is proven to work. Drake, they say, doesn't discover the next big thing. He attaches himself to it once the world already has. That argument isn't new either. In Northern California, the hyphy movement saw similar criticisms. Local pioneers like Mac Dre Aoski, The Jacko, and Keek, D.A. Sneak, laid the groundwork long before the sound broke wider. When E40 tapped into it, some accused him of jumping on a train already in motion. In Drake's case, the same question continues to hang in the air. Is he helping to elevate these sounds, or is he simply coasting off them once they're safe bets?
I find it to be completely insane that he is sitting next to a culture vulture, being a culture vulture himself, and he is expressing how it makes him feel sad that we are calling him a culture vulture, and he's expressing this to someone who does the exact same thing. And to me, it's literally insane. It's like you looking yourself in the mirror talking about why you feel the way.
The criticism doesn't stop at Drake alone. One commentator even argued that not only is Drake a culture vulture, but the very act of sitting across from another one in conversation feels almost absurd. And while that might sound harsh, it reflects the tension. Drake has defenders who will ride for him no matter what, but he also has critics who refuse to let him off the hook. Here's where things get interesting though. The argument isn't one-sided. If Drake truly had no artistic identity, then why do phrases like "that's a Drake type of beat" or "that sounds like a Drake song" exist in the first place? The fact that producers and fans alike can identify a Drake sound suggests that he has, over his 16-year career, left a real imprint on hip-hop. Search YouTube and you'll find Drake-type beats right alongside West Coast beats or Crip Walk beats. That kind of recognition doesn't happen unless you've shaped the genre in a tangible way. Still, the critique of authenticity lingers. His sound has evolved, but has it shifted so much that it begins to resemble mimicry rather than growth? That's the crux of the debate. On one hand, Drake's influence is undeniable. Rappers have adopted elements of his style, and he's written songs for giants like Jay-Z, Kanye West, and even Beyoncé. If you're contributing creative material to artists who themselves are considered among the greatest of all time, it's hard to argue you're not advancing the culture in some way. But then comes the question of identity. Kendrick Lamar's "They Not Like Us" drilled into this exact issue. Drake, the son of a Memphis father and a Jewish Canadian mother, grew up in Toronto, a background that doesn't fit the typical narrative of hip-hop origins. That's not a knock on Toronto, London, or Paris. Each of those places has proven its toughness and talent over time. The critique is more specific. Drake frequently switches accents, slang, and styles, often imitating experiences that aren't really his own. That's where people call foul. And it's not that being influenced is a crime. Every artist takes pieces from others. The difference is that most retain a core identities, something you can always trace back to them. Drake, critics argue, has made reinvention his survival strategy. It's how he's stayed relevant for nearly 2 decades while others have faded. But the trade-off is perception. If you constantly reshape yourself by borrowing from rising movements, UK drill, Caribbean dancehall, Afrobeats, Memphis rap, Houston chopped and screwed, then you start looking less like an innovator and more like someone swooping in after the groundwork has been laid.
Be able to say, man, that sounds like a bar that Drake would rap, right? Or, I don't know, like that's a Drake type of sound, right? That that's the type of a beat that Drake would rap over. We would not be able to use those phrases and they ring any truth whatsoever if Drake has not contributed significantly to the art form over these 16 years. Does that make sense to anybody?
In hip-hop, authenticity has always been more than a buzzword, it's the backbone of the culture. This matters deeply because hip-hop isn't one single, unified entity. Instead, it is a mosaic of subcultures, each tied to geography, history, and lived experience. When we talk about the culture, we're really talking about dozens of overlapping, distinct cultural ecosystems that have grown up in different places, each one developing its own sound, slang, fashion, and way of expressing identity. Take Northern California rap as a starting point. The Bay Area has long been a hub for creativity and experimentation, producing a unique style that blends laid-back funk-inspired beats with high-energy performance and slang that outsiders often find confusing until they immerse themselves in it. Hi-fi, for instance, wasn't just a music movement, it was an entire lifestyle centered on dance, car culture, and neighborhood pride. Artists like Mac Dre, E40, and Keek Da Sneak embodied that culture, bringing it to life with their music and their personalities. When you heard a Bay Area record, you knew where it came from. Compare that to Southern California rap, which has traditionally leaned more into smooth G-funk rhythms, gangsta rap storytelling, and a distinctly different set of cultural markers rooted in LA's neighborhoods and street dynamics. The two regions share a state, but their sounds and their cultural codes stand worlds apart. The same is true when comparing Philadelphia to New York. Both cities have long histories in hip-hop, but their approaches diverge in key ways. Philly has produced generations of battle-ready MCs, known for their aggressive delivery and gritty realism. It's a city that values raw lyricism, stage presence, and authenticity in the most literal sense. You had to be able to prove yourself faced on the mic or on the block. New York, on the other hand, is hip-hop's birthplace, and its style has historically carried a certain swagger and innovation, with artists priding themselves on lyrical complexity, storytelling, and pushing the culture forward. Even today, someone steeped in the culture can tell the difference between a Philly rapper and a New York rapper without needing to check the liner notes. Move south and you'll see the same kind of distinctions. Memphis and Nashville, though both in Tennessee, represent completely different strands of rap DNA. Memphis has always had a darker, more underground energy-haunted beats, ominous production, and an emphasis on raw, street-centered narratives. It's the city that gave rise to 3 6 Mafia, a group whose influence can still be heard in today's trap music and horrorcore aesthetics. Nashville, while known globally for country music, has its own hip-hop scene that developed with different priorities and cultural references. The two coexist in the same state, but tell entirely different stories through their art. Baltimore and DC offer another fascinating example. Both cities are geographically close, but the musical identities couldn't be more different. DC is home to go-go music, a percussion-heavy, live band style that deeply influenced the city's approach to rhythm and crowd interaction. Baltimore, on the other hand, birthed Baltimore Club, a fast-paced, dance-oriented style that often fused with hip-hop to create its own signature sound. Each city produced rappers who carried those local rhythms into their bars, representing their hometowns with pride. To conflate the two would be to miss the richness of each scene's identity. And then there are places like St. Louis, Dallas, Houston, and Chicago, each with their own cultural blueprints. St. Louis brought a sing-song, melodic flair to hip-hop through artists like Nelly and Chingy, whose flows reflected the city's unique blend of Midwest and Southern influences. Dallas has its own distinct slang and bounce, while Houston is globally recognized for its chopped and screwed stylish, slowed-down, syrupy approach to music that mirrors the city's atmosphere and lifestyle. Chicago, meanwhile, went from being recognized for conscious, lyrically sharp rappers like Common and Lupe Fiasco to birthing drill music, a raw, unapologetic reflection of the city's violence and survival struggles. Each of these regions didn't just create music, they created movements. This is why accusations of culture vulturing sting so sharply. When artists from these places grind for years, building recognition in their own neighborhoods and slowly gaining traction beyond, it represents more than just music, it's survival, pride, and authenticity woven together. So when Drake collaborates with an artist from one of these scenes, it's not the collaboration itself that people take issue with. Collaboration, after all, has always been part of hip-hop's DNA. The problem comes when Drake adopts their slang, borrows their flows, or reworks their beats into his own sound after their movement has already been validated on a larger stage. 2 critics. This feels less like genuine participation and more like cashing in. The perception is that Drake waits until a movement has already proven itself and then inserts himself, lending his cosign in exchange for a piece of the cultural pie. To the communities that birthed those movements, that can feel like erasure. Their hard work, their cultural risks, and their unique local flavors get filtered through Drake's global superstar machine, leaving behind a version that may be more palatable to the mainstream but less tied to the authentic roots that made it special in the first place. And here lies the tension. Drake's genius in many ways is his adaptability. His ability to blend styles, reinvent his sound, and pull from a wide range of influences has kept him at the top of the industry for nearly 2 decades, a feat few rappers can claim. But that very adaptability is also the source of his greatest criticism. In a culture where identity and authenticity are non-negotiable, shapeshifting can look a lot like opportunism. Hip-hop is a patchwork of subcultures, each deserving of recognition for the soil it grew from. Whether it's the hyphy energy of the Bay, the drill scene in Chicago, the chopped and screwed legacy of Houston, or the grime roots of London, these movements are more than trends, they are cultural expressions of lived realities. When an outsider borrows heavily from them only after they've gained traction, it raises uncomfortable questions. Is this an homage, or is it exploitation? Is it collaboration, or is it extraction? That's the heart of the Drake debate. He has undeniably contributed to hip-hop, shaping sounds and influencing generations of artists. But he has also leaned heavily on the work of others, often arriving just in time to benefit from the momentum they created. And in hip-hop, a culture built on the authenticity of local voices, that balance between inspiration and appropriation will always be under the microscope.
Are tons of people, let's just say, that believe Jay-Z, Kanye West, Beyonce, right? I get it, different genre, music, whatever, but that believe that those 3 artists in their own right have a very legitimate argument that they're the GOAT. They're the best to ever do it. And Drake has written songs for all of them, and in Jay-Z's case, has, rapped multiple songs with him.
So, yes, Drake has contributed massively to hip-hop. There's no denying his impact. He has influenced production trends across more than a decade, shaping what radio hits and streaming playlists sound like in ways few artists could ever dream of. His collaborations with heavyweights, writing for Jay-Z, sharing verses with Kanye West, or penning for Beyonce prove he has a creative range, respected at the highest levels. His catalog is equally undeniable, filled with records that not only dominate charts but also become cultural touchstones. Songs people remember where they were when they first heard them, from Take Care to Views to Certified Lover Boy. His discography has stamped itself into multiple eras of hip-hop and R&B. But despite all of that, the label of culture vulture doesn't vanish. It lingers because hip-hop has always been about more than sales, accolades, or clever reinventions. At its heart, the genre is rooted in lived experience, loyalty to one's origins, and the authenticity of representing where you come from. Hip-hop wasn't built in boardrooms or recording studios. It came out of neighborhoods, block parties, battles, and communities that turned struggle into art. Authenticity, then, isn't just about style, it's about being tied to a cultural lineage that you don't shed when trends change. This is where Drake becomes such a polarizing figure. His adaptability is, on one hand, his greatest strength. He can step into nearly any sound, whether it's UK grime, Caribbean, dancehall, Afrobeats, trap, or R&B ballads, and make it feel polished, accessible, and globally appealing. That chameleon-like ability has allowed him to stay dominant in an industry where most artists peak for only a few years before fading away. By constantly refreshing his sound, Drake has survived every shift in hip-hop's landscape, from the blog era to the streaming age. Yet, that very adaptability also fuels suspicion. To critics, it feels less like Drake is inspired by other cultures, and more like he borrows from them strategically, stepping in only once the groundwork has been laid by others. In hip-hop, where respect is tied to paying dues and building credibility over time. This approach looks opportunistic. When grime artists in London were fighting to get heard, Drake wasn't there. But once the sound broke through globally, he collaborated with Skepta and Giggs, adopting their slang and rhythms. The same with dancehall and Afrobeats, genres rooted in Caribbean and African culture, carried for decades by artists grinding in their communities, suddenly became a central piece of Drake's sound when they were trending worldwide. Supporters argue this is the nature of music, that genres have always cross-pollinated, and artists have always drawn inspiration from what moves them. They point to the fact that Drake-type beats exist as proof that he has his own recognizable lane. His influence is so strong that producers worldwide now try to replicate his style, which in itself is evidence of cultural contribution. In their view, being able to masterfully borrow, blend, and remix different influences is what makes him a generational artist. But detractors push back, pointing out that Drake rarely seems to give movements the same energy before they blow up. He co-signs after the fact, lending his star power when it's safe. That doesn't read as risk-taking, it reads as capitalizing. And for communities where hip-hop is more than entertainment, where it's survival, identity, and self-expression, the idea of someone swooping in once the hard work is done feels exploitative. This tension creates a complicated legacy. On one side, Drake has elevated hip-hop to new global heights, proving its versatility and ability to dominate across cultures. On the other, his methods raise uncomfortable questions about ownership, credit, and authenticity. Hip-hop was built by local voices representing their cities, their block, their reality. Drake represents a different model, one where identity is fluid, where accents, slang, and style shift with the seasons, and where survival at the top is achieved by absorbing the energy of others. In the end, this is why the charge of culture vulture sticks. It's not because Drake lacks talent, influence, or contributions. It's because hip-hop values the unshakable bond between an artist and their cultural roots. And Drake's success has often come not from being rooted in one place, but from drifting between many. That duality, contributor and borrower, innovator and opportunist, defines his place in hip-hop's ongoing story.